for 70 years. It's just, she led by example, didn't she, like the best of teachers?
There is a wonderful phrase, and I think it might have been in Robert Hardman's book about, you know, she visited the places that needed visiting and she thanked the people that needed thanking. And in that way, she made herself real, and she made people who were doing the things that contribute to the fabric of society feel that they were special. Of course they are special, because those are the things that matter. But I think in one way it was that sort of dogged determination to go to the places that are not glamorous.
Absolutely.
That really was
the least
something,
snobbish of people, and the most courageous, because when you stand in an open-top car and you do walkabouts, which she really introduced, there's a lot of strange people out there. I'm sometimes frightened when people suddenly approach you the way they do. She was very brave. You know, think about the intruder and the horse that bolted, all those things. She was really a warrior.
Also interesting, I think, to look at the way that she aged. There seemed to, and very interestingly, you know, people like Barack Obama and Justin Trudeau talking about the wisdom that came with her, that when they were able to have conversations, it wasn't just that they were meeting a sovereign, it wasn't just they were meeting a fellow head of state, they were meeting somebody who had a kind of institutional memory that went back 70 years, and that was invaluable to them. There's a lot of wisdom that comes with that experience.
So much wisdom and so much discretion. If you remember the blue and yellow flowers that were discreetly behind her after Russia had invaded Ukraine, she had a way of making her point, I think, which was unique. You know.
Dame Maureen Lipman, thank you for sharing your memories and thoughts. It's so nice to see you today.
Lovely to see you too. Thank you.
The state hearse still on its way, still with people on each side of the road, not going along the motorway but coming through the ordinary main roads that will go through the town centres before it gets to Windsor. And at Windsor, in the chapel, much of the congregation already sitting waiting for this family funeral. People who were close to the Queen, worked for the Queen, many again with the Royal Victorian Order medal. And there'll be music played, but the service doesn't actually begin for another hour and a half, and that hour and a half will be taken up with the procession up the Long Walk. A procession very like the one we saw in London, with the pipes and the drums and the bands and all that sort of glorious jewel-like surrounding of the coffin as they come up the Long Walk and into this west door, under the huge window, one of the largest stained glass windows in Britain, and the coffin will be borne up the steps and into the nave. The music's going to be played. It's interesting, the music they're going to play. There's one particular composer who was the organist here at the chapel, who not only played the organ here, but has also provided music for the service itself. And he was here from the 30s until the 60s. The Queen herself used to go up into the organ loft there to listen to him play. And it's said that he actually taught Her Majesty the piano. Sir William Harris is called. But there's music also by Bach and Herbert Howells, Samuel Coleridge Taylor, modern music from Judith Weir, the current master of the King's Music, Elgar Vaughan Williams, all those famous British composers. But for the moment, it seems they sit in silence and just talk to each other. The banners of the Knights of the Garter. Now, interestingly, the 1000th Knight of the Garter, would you believe, was the Prince of Wales, who was Prince William then. He was appointed in 2008, the 1000th Knight of the Garter. It goes back centuries, and it's in the gift, or was in the gift of the sovereign, only given to people who've distinguished themselves in public life. Not all men. There are women, ladies of the Garter, they're called as well, and their banners hang here during their time when they're alive, when they come every year to this service here for the Garter, and then On their death, the banner's taken down, but the seat that they have below in the choir, those brass plaques you can see, are there to commemorate their time as members of the order. There are 700 or 800 of them left here. Some have been taken down because history disapproved of them, others have just fallen down. But otherwise, this extraordinary panoply of the Knights of the Garter, whose chapel this is, and the man responsible for all this is the most senior herald, Garter King of Arms, who made the principal proclamation of the King in St. James's Palace earlier this week, and here today will perform one of his final duties, which is to read out the Queen's styles and titles at the very end of the service. Garter King of Arms, and with the heralds, who nowadays play a mainly symbolic role at state occasions, but in the past were figures of controversy who had to decide who was entitled to call themselves what and who owned what land, and got caught up in all kinds of shenanigans. But now, as so many of the people that we see in the most brilliant colours here enlivening these occasions is actually there simply as a formal role which they play.
Now, someone who knows Windsor very well is the writer and historian William Shawcross. He's taken the time to join us. We're very grateful for that. You've spent a lot of time here. Sometimes it's been social times and sometimes it's been working times. We'll come to that in a second. But today, as somebody who spent a lot of time in the company of the Queen, what are your thoughts?
Well, I don't want to exaggerate and boast and say it was a lot, but I had an incredible honour from the Queen. She asked me to write the official biography of her mother.
And there was a 6-year period where you
years.
researched and wrote that.
Much of that time in this wonderful castle in the round tower behind us, which is where the Royal Archives are.
Right.
And it was an extraordinary joy to read all these letters that had never been written, probably since they were never been read for 50, 60 years.
But didn't you spend time consulting with the Queen and saying, this is what I've found and what do you make of that and is that accurate? So you would take tea with her and you would exchange your research and ask for her opinion?
Yes, she would ask me to tea either here or sometimes at Balmoral if that was, my wife and I went to stay there several times. But you're right, and I would say, look at this letter, ma'am, do you remember this? And she would say, oh yes, this is why I wrote that, or this is why my mother wrote this to me, or to so-and-so. So I got to know her. I was, as I say, very privileged and unlucky to do so.
I mean, you're a very distinguished writer, but that must have been quite nerve-wracking.
It was, but nerve-wracking in theory, but actually the first time after I'd met her, I realized what an extraordinarily kind and gentle person she was, and she always put everybody at their ease. There was never any side to her. It was always gentle and wise and incredibly decent in every sense of the word.
So you had access to this archive, and there were letters between the Queen and the very young Queen and the Queen Mother. I need to ask you a question that has been bothering me because I've read it in 2 or 3 books, which is, during the war, did the Queen Mother sign her letters "Tinkety Tonk Old Fruit and Down with the Nazis"?
She did.
She did?
She did. She didn't sign all her letters like that.
Okay.
If she was writing to the Queen, to Princess Elizabeth, she would say, "With much love from your loving Mama."
Right.
But to friends and cousins, not all of them, and certainly not to a formal letter, she would say, "Tinkety tonk and down with the Nazis."
Right.
And she had this wonderful habit of raising her glass to people she loved and say, "Let's now drink to Winston Churchill." And then raise our glasses to Winston Churchill, and let's lower our glasses to the Nazis. And others.
When you were a house guest, you say both here at Windsor, overnight stay, what were they called? Dine and sleeps, I think.
Dine and sleep was
very
here
posh sleepover.
Yeah, yes, very posh, of course. Being asked to sleep here is very posh. One of the other guests who was there the night that my wife and I were here had a canaletto in his bedroom. Well, that's pretty posh.
That is pretty posh. Right.
And beautiful.
And those events, I mean, I imagine, of course, because you already had this working relationship, not entirely nerve-wracking, but, you know, you have to be careful to do and say the right thing. Notoriously, we have heard throughout this week that the Queen was the consummate hostess, that she worked very hard to put her house guests at their ease. Did you experience that?
Absolutely. There was one classic occasion when my wife and I were coming to stay the night, or the weekend actually, and the British Airways lost my wife's luggage. So she was crestfallen, as you can imagine.
I can.
But we arrived, and the Queen came to the door and said, "I hear you've lost your luggage. I'm terribly sorry, but I've tried to arrange with the other ladies' guests and ladies in waiting and others to find some clothes for you." And so they did. And my wife had a very nice shirt from a lady in waiting, and a skirt from someone else, and a beautiful belt from a Polish maid.
Wonderful.
So it was fantastic.
Tell me then what your thoughts were today when you were watching the service, and not necessarily what do you expect them to be, but what is your sort of state of mind as somebody who is saying goodbye to somebody who was dear to them and who they knew?
I think the whole thing has been quite astonishingly beautiful and emotional, not just for me, but I think the emotion of the whole country has been extraordinary to see over the last week. It's because people loved her. She'd been here for 70 years, and she loved us. And what you've seen, I think, is a mixture of grief and gratitude on the part of the people in this last 7 days, and it's just fantastic, and it's very, very well deserved. The other thing, I think, which was mentioned several times in the service by the Archbishop and others, is that the Queen didn't think this was the end. She believes in resurrection. And I found, when I was doing my research, a lovely remark that she made in a speech in Australia, an Aboriginal proverb, which she said was enduring. And the proverb said, "We are in this time and place for a short time, to learn, to observe, to love, and then we go home."
It's a beautiful thought. William Shawcross, we thank you very much for sharing your memories and sharing all your thoughts, and it was very interesting to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, to be chosen as the Sovereign's Piper is a great honour. Anita, I think, is joined now by somebody who has held that role. Anita.
Yes, I'm with Jim Motherwell, who was appointed Piper to the Sovereign in 1997. What does that mean, Jim? What was the job?
The role of the job, you play the bagpipes every morning underneath the Queen's window from 9 till 9:15. Then you pack them away. Then you go and collect the Queen when she comes down from her private apartments at the lift, and you just stay with her, regarding what she's doing, interviews, visits, investitures. You basically work all day with her. And then when you're finished, you take her back round to the lift and she goes back upstairs to her private apartment.
What an incredible job to have.
It was very surreal.
Every single day you would play a tune on the bagpipes. Same tune every day?
No, you not to repeat the tunes all week, and you get a lot of tunes into 15 minutes on the bagpipes.
Did you ever get requests?
Yeah, the Queen's got her favourite tunes, a lot of them. A couple that Pipe Major Burns, who's the present Queen's Piper, played today. And she used to ask for a tune called Dovecote Park because she remembered it from she was a princess at the end of the war.
And then you go up to Balmoral as well?
Balmoral's the best part of the year because I've got loads of duties, or I had loads of duties to do at Buckingham Palace. But once you get up to Balmoral, you play the bagpipes in the morning, you play at dinner in the evening, and during the day you would go out horse riding, shooting, practicing your military training in case you ended up back in the regiment.
Not a bad life.
Yeah,
now,
okay.
One of the most poignant moments in the funeral service was when the Piper played.
Oh, that was for me big time, because the Piper, Pipe Major Paul Burns, he's a very good player, but he's young, and I remember what that feeling was like, and I was more nervous for him today than I was when I played the Queen Mother out the church when she passed away nearly 20 years ago.
He did an amazing job though.
He did a fantastic job.
So if I were to ask you one enduring memory of the Queen, what would it be?
My wife was hurt in an accident at work in London, and she was quite badly hurt. And I had to take time off, compassionate time off, and then when I went back to work, the Queen asked how my wife was and how she was coping. And I said, there's no long-term injuries, but she's covered in bruises. So the Queen said, wait there. She went back upstairs in the lift, came back down and gave me a little bottle of Anika to put on my wife's bruises. So Trish was very happy with that.
Such compassion.
Yeah, that's the word, compassion. She's a very compassionate lady.
Well, it's been a real pleasure to hear your memories. And what does it mean to be here today, Jim?
Oh, it's very special. I mean, when I saw on the news and the TV that the Queen had died, that's all it said, the Queen dies. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes. But this is lovely doing this, seeing all this, the pageantry. It just brings my job back into the forefront of my head again.
Jim, thank you very much.
You are very welcome.
Beautiful memories. Well, there is a unique bond between the monarch and the armed forces, of course. To tell us more, I am joined by Sir Sebastian Roberts, former Major General of the Household Division, and Sir David Cannadine has joined us again. Thank you to you both. Sir Sebastian, if I can come to you first of all, what are your thoughts on a day like today?
Well, as you just said, there is a unique bond between the armed forces and the monarchy and the monarch. And I think for all of us who've had the honour to serve our Queen, our King and country, that bond is special. I think, of course, at the same time, that we all, at the time of a funeral, we're on the brink of eternity. We're on that moment that will come to all of us, and which in the military one I suppose confronts by virtue of one's service, one's own mortality and that of others. And I think we always knew that the Queen, as part of her service, had a great consciousness of the eternal verities, the things that do face us all, at the same time as being a deeply human individual. And that was the other side of being fortunate enough to be a guardsman, that one had the opportunity quite often to see the deep humanity, the person, as well as the image that we all knew and served.
And how did that display itself? When did you see it at its greatest?
In so many ways and on so many occasions. I can remember here in Windsor, one year after the grand military horse race meeting at Sandown, the Queen followed her mother, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, in giving a party afterwards. And one year, several people who had been badly wounded in Afghanistan were invited. And I found myself going in with another member of my regiment, Ghazen Mina, who had just lost both legs and an arm a couple of months earlier. And when he was presented to the Queen next to me, she said, if you're not able to go on serving in my Irish Guards, what will you do? And he said, it doesn't really matter, ma'am, as long as it's serving people less well off than myself. And, well, as you can perhaps imagine, her eyes filled with tears. And one realised that any mask was easily laid aside.
And of course she came from a military family through and through. She understood the military in a way that was not simply ceremonial and part of her role as sovereign.
Yeah, absolutely. She certainly felt, I think, at ease with people who had made the same sort of commitment as she had as a young woman. She joined the army, as we all know, in the Second World War, and then found herself with intimate connections to the armed forces, for a start, being the child and the wife of a serving naval officer. I think it's well known how much she enjoyed her life before she became Queen as a naval wife. And I think she so deeply appreciated being surrounded by people who had made that oath of allegiance, which, if you like, binds one to being circumspect, but also sharing those values which she so clearly embodied. Selfless commitment, duty, all those things. I think she clearly lived by and liked being among people who had made the same commitment.
David Cannadine, we are hearing, and I'm sure viewers are hearing it too, the splendid sound, and maybe people can also enjoy the sight of the military as they are marching through and around St Giles Cathedral. And we might think for a moment about some of the ceremonial that is going to take place today. There will be the laying of the colours at the feet of the Queen's coffin and a little more besides. Can you explain a little of that?
Well, we've already seen a great deal of military involvement in the funeral so far, And the sense that the funeral of a reigning monarch is in many ways a military funeral dates back in its modern guise to Queen Victoria's time. She wanted a military funeral. She took great pride in being a soldier's daughter. And the gun carriage, which is of course an essential part of what we've seen today, signifies that. It's also the case that because of the slight hitch, to put it no more strongly, in Queen Victoria's funeral, the horses were taken out because they threatened to bolt. And Prince Louis of Battenberg summoned naval ratings to pull the gun carriage up to here. And so the tradition of state funerals having a gun carriage pulled by naval ratings dates back to then, and is a further aspect of the military nature of these last rites of a sovereign who, as Sebastian has pointed out, is of course the head of the armed services.
And we will see something today called, now I hope I get this right, is it called the breaking of the wand?
We shall indeed see the breaking of the wand.
It sounds unlikely, that phrase.
Unlikely.
Can you tell me what it means?
Well, in the first place, we will never have seen this before because no committal or funeral service of a reigning monarch that has taken place at St George's Chapel, Windsor, has ever before been televised. So we shall see the Lord Chamberlain breaking his wand for the first time ever. The Lord Chamberlain has a wand. It's a long staff because in the old days he was the presiding person at court events, and courtiers tended to misbehave and talk rather more loudly than I suspect they do today, and in order to call for appropriate silence he used to bang the wand on the floor, and that was the purpose of having the wand. And what has been traditional for a very long time is that with the death of the sovereign and the service here, at the end of that service the Lord Chamberlain breaks the wand to signify the ending of one reign and I suppose the beginning of another. So we will see that later today.
For the first time ever.
For the first time ever.
Thank you so much for sharing that, and Sir Sebastian, thank you too for sharing your memories. Lovely to hear them.
And it has to be said the wand is actually buried with the Queen's coffin. So we'll see it as the coffin disappears from sight in St George's Chapel. The route that the procession will take, lined with the guards here, but also with the Royal Navy, the Royal Marines, the Army and the Royal Air Force. A band of the guards, a new band coming in here to play. The guards divisions, the Grenadiers, the Coldstream, the Irish, the Welsh and the Scots are all present here. Now the liners are all the way down this long walk. You could see them just fading into the distance. And the coffin will arrive at the far end there and then come up in this procession at the slow walk. The RAF musicians, the Royal College, Royal Air Force College at Cranwell, all the guards lined here, they were all out here on Saturday morning in the pitch dark rehearsing this, and the Royal Hearse in the meantime is about 7 minutes away from us. I think it's past Runnymede and it's on its way to Windsor, still with people on either side of the street. I'm sure when it actually gets closer to Windsor, judging by the crowds that they've been at Windsor, there'll be thousands more people to greet it. Close to the River Thames as it comes through towards Windsor itself. The tradition of throwing flowers into the road began, I think, with the funeral of Princess Diana, when, you may remember, as you can see on the Royal Hearse now, flowers on the bonnet. There were flowers on the windscreen that had to be wiped away with windscreen wipers. So as we wait for the hearse to come to the castle grounds itself, and then the start of the full procession, let's just get back for a moment to Kirsty.
Joining me now is Bishop Rachel Treweek. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us. I understand you had, now I was reading my notes and it said an audience with Her Majesty when you were taking up your new role. I think that sounds like a terrifying phrase. What was the briefing? How did it go?
Yes, every bishop, when they become a diocesan bishop, goes to pay homage to Her Majesty.
Right.
So go to Buckingham Palace and go into the palace and meet with her and kneel before her. And she put her hands over my hands and I swore allegiance to her.
And how did you have a flutter of nerves? Was it a conversation?
Terrifying.
Were you briefed before? Did they say this is where you stand?
Yes, I think the thing with me was I was the first female bishop she'd ever received.
Ah.
And so as I stood outside the door, there was a bit of fluttering about whether I should curtsy or bow wearing my robes. And then there came that moment when I was told that I would need to kiss the Bible. The Bible was on a cushion, opened at a verse I'd chosen, and they said, you'll need to kiss the Bible at the appropriate moment. And I said, I can't possibly do that. And people looked at one another rather worried, as if there was some theological reason why I couldn't do that. And I simply said, I'm wearing lipstick. So that was the first time that had happened. So I was asked to put my nose into it.
You were a house guest at Sandringham as well, and I've been talking to guests today about, yes, I mean, that is, I suppose, not only an honour and a treat, but a slightly nerve-wracking set of circumstances. How did you find it?
Yes, and indeed, as a bishop, you're not there as a house guest, you're there as a member of the Queen's household at that time. You're there to preach at Sandringham on the Sunday. And again, a very nerve-wracking experience, but as we've heard so often in recent days, Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth was amazing at making you feel very at home. And I particularly remember her sitting at her card table, playing Patience and sitting next to her. And it really put one at your ease because you weren't looking eye to eye like this. She was looking down, playing cards and talking. And it was a wonderful thing that she did to make you feel at home.
Something that we've heard very often people saying over the last 10, 11 days is that they felt that the Queen, for 70 years or however many years they had been alive, was this constant, this reassuring presence that was constantly there, that represented continuity. So she did that for the hundreds of thousands of people who queued to see her lying in state. She did it for the millions who watched the lying in state online. I was thinking about where she got her reassurance from and where she got her continuity from, and I'm imagining the answer to that might be her faith, because we are told time and time again that that was absolutely central to who she was.
Absolutely. She was rooted and grounded in her faith in Jesus Christ. And it's interesting you saying, Kirsty, about that constant presence, because even in death, she has been constant till now. People watching the coffin at this very moment, thousands of people queuing to be even in her presence in death. And of course now as we come to the committal, we are acknowledging that that presence will be no more, that we are letting go, but we are letting go of her into eternal life with God. And she believed that, and as a follower of Jesus Christ, I believe that. And I think there's that thing that's been acknowledged again and again about her referring to Christ as the one who came to earth not to be served but to serve. And her service has been noted again and again, and that ability she had to make every person feel very special in that moment. And I would say that's because she knew that her sovereignty was bestowed upon her by God, and yet she was a human being.
Studying much of what she said, and particularly in her Christmas messages, she seemed, as she grew older, to be, I think, bolder about stating her faith and talking about it more openly. Is that something you discerned? Did you feel that? Even though it was always with her, one gets the feeling that she sort of thought, well, I'm not necessarily going to listen to the advisors who might say that's a turn-off, and it is a turn-off for plenty of people. I'm going to simply tell it like it is.
Yes, I think that's true, that she was confident in sharing her faith. Perhaps that did get stronger as she got older. but that sense that she was rooted and grounded in her faith in Jesus Christ, and yet wanted to be there for all people and people of all faith and no faith. And that sense that she knew that every human being, she believed, as I believe, is created in the image of God and was unique and precious.
We're going to witness again, as we have done day in, day out over the past 11 days, the ritualizing of grief, that somehow that is the thing that the Church has seemed to give us through this period, where we are wondering about what we feel, wondering how we can mark the importance of this momentous passing. The Church has in a way come into its own in that respect, and it has said to us, well, you might be a believer, you might not be a believer, but this is the way we can make sense of a very difficult situation.
Yes, and I would say that in death the Queen has served us, because her death has enabled us to really allow our own stories to resonate with this national story of grief and mourning. Over these last few days, her death has held that space. And I would say, if we see all the flowers, the tributes, people queuing up for hours to pay respects to her, there's something about people's own stories, their own grief, their own pain, being allowed to come to the fore. And today, in this committal service, there will be that finality,
yes,
that letting go. And I think in that moment, we will acknowledge all the different losses. People will, in their own stories, acknowledge the different losses, their own grief, for friends, for family, things in life that people had wished had been. And that space will be held as we let go of Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, and as we allow our own pain and our own stories to be held in that moment.
That's such an interesting thought, because that really is essentially about the thing that the Queen relentlessly promoted throughout her life, which was community. That actually community comes together in the good times, but it also comes together in the difficult times. And many people who've spoken about their feelings regarding the Queen's death have said that it reminds me of when.
Yes.
And that seems to have been an important part of this whole 11 days as well.
Absolutely, about community, about the fact that as unique individuals we do belong together. That's also central to Christian faith, that actually the body of Christ we talk about. And in her life and in her death, people are being drawn together. And my hope and prayer is that our remembering won't be mere nostalgia,
yes,
but that it will change us. That as we gather and as we watch this committal service, that each person will ask, what does this mean to me? What will my life be because of this?
That's very interesting. Is that then what you think? Because my final question to you really was going to be, I was going to ask you what you think the legacy of this monarch will be. Is that it?
I hope that her faith will be remembered, that it will live on. I hope that it will make people curious. I hope people will be curious about faith. And I hope that that legacy will be that in our differences, we come together. So often in our world, we live in a world where difference divides people. And at the heart of the Christian message is we might have differences, but we move towards one another in our differences.
Thank you very much, the Right Reverend Rachel Treweek. Very interesting to talk to you and hear your reflections. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kirsty. This empty road now, as the hearse approaches the middle of the long walk that leads up to Windsor Castle. As everywhere the hearse passes, a salute as it goes past. And on the long walk itself, at the bottom end, the guard of honour that will escort it up to the castle is assembling. That little crossing you can see at the bottom of the long walk there with the flowers on either side, that's the Cambridge Gate. We're looking at it from Windsor Castle. and the whole procession will come from the far distance there, right past these throngs of people on either side of this great park. The equerries in uniform there, many of them, and they're chosen to stand either side of the coffin. Equerries who served the Queen either at Balmoral or Windsor or at Buckingham Palace or at Sandringham indeed, and they stand closest to the coffin, and the bearer party on the either side of them, the bearskins drawn from the Queen's company of the 1st Battalion of the Grenadier Guards. Grenadier Guards who were the closest regiment to the Sovereign, the Queen's company particularly close to her. The Grenadier Guards whose loyalty to the British Sovereign has never been questioned. So they don't, in practice, ever drink a toast to the monarch, because their loyalty is undoubted. This splendid sight now starting to gather, and it will be very similar but slightly more modest, perhaps is a way of putting it, slightly more intense is another way of thinking of it. The Household Cavalry, a division of the Sovereign's escort, pipes and drums, the band of the Grenadier Guard, dismounted band of the Household Cavalry.